Connie is here because she's in our centering prayer group at 4, and I asked and Dave is too. I asked people if they could to come help out. But to tell you about centering prayer is just the joy of my life. It's really a form of contemplative prayer, because we usually think of prayer as thoughts or feelings expressed in words. But in contemplative prayer, it is the opening of the mind and heart and our whole being to God, the ultimate mystery beyond thoughts, beyond words and emotions. And as I continue to read what Thomas Keating wrote, who helped get this all started back in the 70s, through grace we open our awareness to God, whom we know by faith is within us, closer than breathing, closer than thinking, closer than choosing, closer than consciousness itself. And I want to begin with the scripture that Father Thomas Keating told us when I was on a retreat in 1999 out at St. Benedict in Snowmass at the Trappist Monastery there. And it started on Saturday, and on Tuesday, Father Keating, Father Thomas, as they called him, the abbot, retired emeritus, came and visited with us retreatants. And it was a 10-day centering prayer retreat. And he talked about where this came from as far as Jesus is concerned. And it's in Matthew 6, where Jesus is answering the disciples' question about how shall we pray. And I'm just going to read part of it. And what comes after this is the Lord's Prayer. But let me just read this part. And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, for they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. Here's the important sentence. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Well, Father Thomas reminded us that in those days, there were no private rooms. It was the house was all big one room. And so this was a real strong metaphor for the heart, or for your inner being. And so thus, this is a prayer. This is really a prayer of the heart. And it really entered our world, our Western world, in the 70s, when all these young people were going to India to follow a Maharishi for the Beatles. And so everybody was interested in the Eastern meditation. And the guys at the monastery in Spencer, Massachusetts, St. Joseph's, where Father Thomas at that time was abbot, sought to find something that was comparable in the Christian tradition, which they certainly knew about, but it was only known by monks. And they found one of the monks there, Menninger, was looking at that wonderful classic, the Cloud of Unknowing, which is what, a 14th century, Connie? 14th century anonymous book about prayer that a monk is writing to one of his directees. And they started calling it the prayer of the cloud. And then after a while, the nuns and monks really liked it, but the laity, my gosh, it really took off. And pretty soon they were calling it centering prayer. And the reason they were calling it centering prayer was because of Thomas Merton, whom you've all heard of, because he would talk about, was the one that really brought this back into public consciousness in the 60s. He would talk about going down into your center of your being. And he talked about La Pointe Vierge, the virgin point in the middle, in your deepest self. And this is where God dwells. And so everybody started calling it centering prayer. And that's how it got its name. And I'm just going to read the guidelines, and then and I started, so I've been centering since Wynn and Charlie Davy back in about 97 introduced this kind of prayer at Christ in St. Luke's at one of those Wednesday night things, classes. And I had heard about it. I mean, I had tried meditation with the Buddhists and through yoga, but this really made me feel like I had come home, because it's meditative, it's intentional, and it gets to the quiet that I so long for within. But I'm not going to tell you the guidelines yet, because you can always come to an afternoon session, but also Connie always warns me not to tell them too much. But it is a prayer of letting go. Anytime you realize you're thinking, you come back to your sacred word, and that's the essence, and say it in your heart. So it's letting go, letting go, letting go, letting go. And so since 1997, I've been trying to center. And since 99, when I went out to the St. Benedict's in Snowmass, and then I started a centering prayer group here at Christ in St. Luke's, and only Barbara Price used to come. And so then that didn't work, so I started it in my home at 6:30 on Wednesday morning, so people who went to work could come to it. And we used to, so you sit for 20 minutes, and then you would walk around. We walk around meditatively, kind of like Thich Nhat Hanh, and then you sit for another 20 minutes, and then you have a reading, and then a contemplative kind of discussion. So we would walk around our dining room table. So, and then when I went to seminary in 2005, Julia Dorsey Loomis, who is a priest in the diocese and was working at St. Andrews, took it over to St. Andrews. And so there they sit in the living, we sat in the living room, and we walk around the church inside, and then do another sit. So, and since COVID, we've been on Zoom. And so two of the people who were confirmed today first started getting in touch with Christ in St. Luke's through this centering prayer group. Okay, I've talked enough. Let's see. So Connie or Wynn or Dave, if you have anything that you would like to give another voice, and then people can ask questions.
Why don't we see if people have questions first?
Okay. Ellie, you popped up. Did you have a question?
So I think it's very similar to Quakerism, except in Quaker meeting, it lasts a full hour.
Yeah.
Undo the onion and get down to the center.
Uh-huh. I think you're right. And the person who's had so much influence on me is Cynthia Bourgeot. And her background included being part of a Quaker tradition as a child. And I think that had enormous influence on her. But I think you're absolutely right.
Right. In Hawaii, I used to go to some of their meetings at St. Michael's.
It sounds similar, feels similar.
Same.
Yeah, same.
I wonder if there's a body of literature for the Quakers. I wonder if they're given any instructions on how that
Oh,
silent.
there's tons of literature. Pendle Hill, I think Wallingford, Pennsylvania probably could give you some literature. The Quaker Center.
I know particularly about that silence, not about the whole Quaker movement.
Oh, I'm sure they have something about Quaker meeting in silence, I would think. Can't promise, but I would think so.
I find that centering prayer is particularly good for extremely active, driven people who maybe don't accomplish all that they're driven to do, but always have a to-do list in their mind, and people who are very verbal. And so I could be describing me. I even dream in dialogue and activity, and you could write a script from my dreams because my brain is just constantly spinning and spinning and spinning. And centering prayer is a wonderful antidote for that because it removes the temptation and the distraction to pray with words or intentions or to tell God what God needs to do for me, which is often or what God needs to do for you when I'm feeling generous. It's a way of coming to the silent center and opening a space large enough for a long enough time for the Spirit of God to get a word in edgewise, or to get a presence in that is not of my own imagination.
And I think one of the things about that presence is the silence that is this dropping down into silence is so such a wonderful thing. I know a friend who is so able to drop down into it that he gets scared. He follows a Buddhist tradition, and it worries him some. But actually, and some people have thought that this getting down to where you're not thinking and you're just sitting is a chance for the devil to do his work. This is what a lot of evangelical folks teach. But actually, it is such a wonderful gift of what would be some words? I don't know. Is
Trust. Trust.
Trust, and you just feel you're not sitting waiting for a special word from God. And bringing it back and then writing it in your journal. You're just sitting in this kind of alternate space that is really it feels really good to me.
It's sort of like being an infant lying in parents' arms without feeding, without words, without expectations. It's just that kind of contented trust without an agenda.
Connie, I think you've really captured it beautifully, and certainly I don't really have anything to add, except that I think you've laid it out. The one thing that resonated with me was one of the people at St. Joseph's Abbey in Massachusetts, who probably had a lot to do with the popularity of centering prayer. Father Basil Pennington was one of the most extroverted people I've ever seen in my life. And he was one of those people that his mind was always going. And when he walked down the street, he didn't walk, he bounced. But I think it did for him, and what you were talking about, Connie, in terms that creating the space, because he could easily move into that place and lead centering prayer, and and I think it really was a very important experience for him. And he had that same personality that Thomas Merton had, where you scratch your head and say, how could they be a Trappist monk, but yet how could they not be a Trappist monk?
I have just one little story about doing centering prayer in a group. I find Zoom very helpful because it keeps everybody so quiet, and you can sit there in your jammies and do a centering prayer group. But one time I went to a retreat in Albuquerque where Richard Rohr and the Center for Action and Contemplation are, and Cynthia Bourgeault was there too. So there's my two favorite writers, I think, and proponents of centering prayer. And I failed to read the small print on the brochure. And I thought it was a retreat such as Sue was referring to at Snowmass. There were 2,000 people there, which was a bit of a surprise to me. And there actually was a hotel room that could hold 2,000 people sitting hip to hip. And twice a day, we centered for 25 minutes in the morning and in the evening. And 2,000 people in one room doing centering prayer in absolute silence was one of the most powerful experiences. I mean, it didn't have any particular content. There wasn't any big revelation, but there was just a kind of spiritual energy being with people who were all emptying themselves to God at the same time and in the same place. It was amazing.
Wow. That's just incredible to think about. I've been in a room with maybe 25 people, but never 2,000, Connie. Somebody asked about Bourgeois, and I put the last name spelling up on it's French on chat. This is the book that we're reading right now, segment by segment, like there are 2 or 3. And this is called Centering Prayer and Inner Awakening. And I think that's the whole point is to awaken our hearts and to awaken our spirits, to be open to the nudges. Who used to talk about nudges? That's somebody I know, but I can't remember who. Huh?
Jim Sell.
Jim Sell, yeah, about nudging. And I think so that it makes us more awake to what's going on with our neighbor and in our world. It isn't something that just keeps us focused on ourselves. It kind of frees us up. Dave, were you going to say something? You unmuted.
Yeah, I think the passage that you used from "Be still and know that I'm," when you used, I'm getting some feedback. Are you hearing feedback in my?
Yeah, there was some feedback.
Okay.
Talking about be still and know that I am God.
When you were talking about trust, I would just offer the word stillness as the one word. I think people naturally assume because I have a loud voice that I am fundamentally extroverted, but I'm moving along the scale in the other direction as each year passes, and I really need just an excuse to stop. now. I need a rationale to be still. And this way of prayer provides just simply the rationale and the time to be able to stop and be still. So in this last week, I had 2 occasions. I was going into the hospital to see someone who was near to death, and I was pretty toasted from the day, and I knew that a lot was going to be needed to be drawn from me spiritually over the next period of time, and I didn't know how long that was going to be as soon as I entered the hospital. And I had a reason, because the family members had not all arrived, to just stop in my car in the parking garage in the hospital. And that ability to just simply stop and be still. Now, I almost fell asleep, but I didn't think about anything. I cast all the thoughts, cares, concerns, everything completely aside, and simply sat in my car seat. And that was incredibly, in its own way, productive in its replenishing, or its productive. You see, productive is the wrong word, but it was wonderful to use the attributes of centering prayer over a period of 15 to 20 minutes that I had. And then when I decided to leave my car, I was ready to go again. And so that I find myself drawing from what you have taught me now when I have less time, but I have an opportunity to be still. So I'll stop there.
Dave, I once did centering prayer in an MRI tube.
I also used it when I was undergoing some surgery under local. It really brings you into that place of letting go and that quiet. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I use it the other day as I was waiting to get all the shots to numb a piece of my leg. And I had to wait a long time for the surgical nurse in an office to come up, almost an hour. I couldn't reach my book. So it's really something. One of the things I'm going to say about it is that it's a very simple kind of a way of meditating that's called intentional rather than attentional. You don't have to pay attention. All you have to do when you're sitting there, after you've gotten a sacred word of 2 or 1 syllable, like Abba or Amen or Jesus or peace or trust, is that anytime you realize that you're noticing the cars going by, you're thinking about what you've got to get at the grocery store, you're noticing that you've gone down a planning time, you're noticing your conversation you had with somebody, whatever it is, whether it's something in your environment or something within, as soon as you notice it, you come back very gently, gentle as a feather on the breath of God, very gently to your sacred word and say it silently in your heart. And so it's just, and sometimes you might take 1,000 times in your 20 minutes. 20 minutes are recommended twice a day. But if you say it, so every time that you say your sacred word in your heart, you're saying yes to God because you're consenting. You're consenting to God's presence and activity within. And so it's just over and over again, letting go. And that is what's so extraordinary about it and so simple about it. And you don't have to, you can just, every time you realize you're thinking and let go and say yes again, well, see, there's no blame, there's no judgment, there's no way of doing it right. As the bishop said one time in our group on this afternoon's group, she said, we're always beginning over again. It's a real beginner's mind, if you guys remember who said that. Always talking about the beginner's mind back in the 60s. So, so there's that. It's just a particularly helpful time too, for that you find that nothing much happens during that time at all. And we don't talk about what goes on particularly, because the important thing is you see how it affects your life. And one of the ways that it affects my life is I'm less reactive to whatever is happening. I have more equanimity. And I would say that and sometimes, and I try and do it, especially during this pandemic, especially since I've gotten blessed with illness, I've been trying to do it twice a day, because that makes an extraordinary difference. To one's sense of being and being able to be in the moment, I think. And so what Dave described was really wonderful. An illustration of, you don't just have to have this practice of morning and evening like the bishop does it at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. And she's been doing it for 30 years. And she said she was sorry she couldn't help out today, but she's driving back to Williamsburg. But she said, you tell them how much I like it and how important it's been for me. And it is wonderful having a contemplative bishop, isn't it, at our head of our diocese. So it's just learning to be still and know that I am God. That's really what it is. Anybody who hasn't spoken want to say something?
I think I would just emphasize that this is for everybody. It's not for fussy, picky, holier than thou nuns and monks. It's for everybody in every level of everything. It's a way of connecting with God that you do regularly, and it affects the rest of your life. And it does something to that center, that point vierge that you were talking about, that point which is the intersection of the holy and eternal in my own self. And just to nurture that so that God can enter that way affects everything else for everybody. And you can try it a few times. And if it's not for you, you can just, that's the joy of a Zoom group. You can come, you can try it. And if you don't like it, if it doesn't speak to you after a few times, you can drift away.
I have a dear friend, one of my oldest friends, and she was raised in a kind of background that she has really had to reject. But unfortunately for her, she says it's also made her not be able to sense anything of the divine or anything in the ultimate reality. So she thought, okay, I'm going to try it. So she came and she tried it a few times, and she just couldn't stand all the God talk. So, and there wasn't even that much in my mind. But anyway, she's still working on learning to meditate and wants so much to find some kind of spirituality that just got ruined for her as a youngster. So, but there are many people who come and just try it a couple of times, and then they're about I'd say 12 to 18 of us that are there every time. So you're welcome to come this afternoon at 4. It's what we do is somebody, often it's Connie, reads a psalm from Nan Murrell's Psalms for Praying, which is a different different interpretation of the Psalms. It's a more what do you say? Instead of talking about enemies, she'll talk about fears in the Psalms, for instance. And then I have a gong, which I didn't bring down to show you. I knew I forgot something. I've got this wonderful bell, golden bell that my daughter brought me back from a retreat in India that I ring, hold it up and ring. And then we sit for 20 minutes. And then somebody, including Wynn, sometimes chants, you know, the be still and know that I am God, and then be still, then know that I am, be still and know, be still, be. And then while we're still in our contemplative space, I read a little bit from this book, Centering Prayer and Inner Awakening by Cynthia. And right now, today, I'll be reading in the Loss and Recovery of the Christian Contemplative Tradition, and I'll only be reading from here to here. And then we respond to it, or whatever we want to say, and we try not to cross-talk, but just to keep the contemplative space. And eventually it might be cross-talk, or we may add, you know, but it's done by 4. We have, we go over the prayer, over the psalm again, and people then, like Lectio Divina, they say after the person rereads the psalm, most of the time it's Connie, we then say a phrase or a word that moves us, and then we say the Lord's Prayer together. And it's a very efficient use of 1 hour, and it's terrific, I think, to have it at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And I particularly aimed it at that time when I decided to start the second group, because Sunday afternoon can be very, very lonely for people. And I thought this might be a good time. And then it turned out I could even be on the Christ in St. Luke's schedule and have Wynn being my host most of the time. And then 2 or 3 people joined from the Wednesday group to help out. But if you can't do this at 4 on Sunday, there's also one on Wednesday morning at 6:30 in the morning. So anyway, that's about it.
Sue, I am about to lose my power. I'm out here in the garden because I didn't have enough time to get home after church, but I have made you the host, so
Okay.
you can end. I didn't want to suddenly disappear and shut everyone down. The only thing I would just add is to underscore what's already been said, is no matter how many years, you're always a beginner. And that is just so liberating to know. There are no experts.
That's very true. Thank you. And thank you. Okay. So it's almost 4 o'clock. I mean, almost, almost 12 o'clock. We have 3 minutes to go. Anybody want to say something that they would just kick themselves if they didn't say? Dave's doing a health thing. Pardon?
I want to thank you for doing this. It is such a powerful experience, and it's so wonderful for me on a Sunday afternoon to end my day with with the centering. I also want to underscore what Connie said about, or maybe you said about Zoom. It's like the silence emanates from my computer. It is so wonderful.
Thank you, Wynn. Glad you're part of it for sure.
Thank you.
And most of the people are not priests, though the ones who've been talking today all have collars on, I noticed. If I'd realized that, I wouldn't have worn my collar. I didn't have my collar for years when doing centering prayer.
Well, thank you all very much for doing this, and thank you, Connie and Dave and Sue, and I look forward to seeing you at 4 p.m. today. And if any of you want to just try it, go ahead and link in. We don't put anyone on the spot, and you can just be muted and get a sense of what it feels like.
Okay.
Blessings, and Sue, you will need to end the meeting.
Okay. Will
Thank
do.
you.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. It's good to see you again. And if you have any questions offline, you can text Connie or me or Dave or Win and come join us or come to the Wednesday morning one. Thank you it's good to see you. And it was good to see people in church today too. Wasn't that a wonderful sermon that Bishop Susan Connie, she stood and just wove together things out of Ephesians for the epistle and then the gospel today for our confirmation. It was just beautiful. It was amazing. Somebody said, yes, she can speak in paragraphs. So it was terrific. Thank you, Connie, very much. You are a rock star.
My privilege to be with some of these folks that I used to spend a lot of time with.
That's right.
Blessings to you all. Now I just see you at the grocery store.
Okay, thank you guys. I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you all so much, but feel free to call or text.